Dark, if you want to keep your screens dark, you may do that. If you want to show us your lovely faces, we'd love to see you. You may notice that we have a lot of young people joining us because we scheduled this purposely after school. So the youth leaders, youth prevention leaders around the state could be able to join us as well, as coalition members might find it a little bit easier as well. So I think with that, we're going to get started. Okay. And these are our learning objectives. We were thinking we wanted to provide an update on some of the most currently misused drugs that Connecticut youth are using, as well as give you some data, some information about those, and prepare coalition members and youth to be able to talk about them. What are some of the key messages that they need to have? So basically, we're going to identify those most commonly misused drugs and review some drug facts. We're going to review some updated Connecticut and national data where we have it. We're going to identify some risk and protective factors, discuss some effective prevention strategies, share some key prevention messages. You know, what are some sound bites that you can share, and then identify resources. Each of the substances will have a list of resources that you can go to. And of course, remember the Connecticut Clearinghouse, ctclearinghouse.org is our one-stop shopping center for all kinds of resource information as well. So I think on that note, if you haven't already, please sign in to the chat box. And as I said, we'll be recording this and we will be emailing a link to the recording and the presentation slides. Okay, so I'm going to stop talking and turn it over to Ken.
Thanks, Lisa. So we're going to start off with a quick poll here. And let's see if I can. Okay, so if everybody could go ahead, and you'll have to scroll down as you answer because there are 5 questions here. So just to kind of get an idea of where your knowledge, I meant to put for the following substances there. So I'll give everybody just a moment here to complete that, and then we'll show the results. And for those of you just joining us, if you could just take a moment and answer our poll questions here before we get going, and then please remember to sign in the chat box. All right, we'll go about another 10 seconds or so. All right, just about everybody has completed it. So let's see our results here. Okay, can everybody see those okay? All right. So for alcohol, looks like we have about a quarter of us with some basic knowledge, more than half of us with adequate knowledge. And good, we have a bunch of people in the room with superior knowledge. That's excellent. So cannabis, most people basic and adequate. A few people with some superior knowledge. Vaping, looks like we see a little bit more knowledge in the room around vaping, which isn't too surprising because I know in the last few years there's been a lot of trainings around vaping. Prescription stimulants. All right, so again, there's some a little bit lower here. some fewer people with adequate and superior knowledge. And lastly, opioids. We have kind of an even mix, in the middle, basic and adequate. I know that it's been gaining a lot of popularity. A lot of us have been reading about it and have seen trainings about it, and unfortunately reading a lot about it in the news. So I can see how our knowledge is increasing around there. So thank you, everybody, for participating in that. So I hope that we can all learn a little bit more and gain some more knowledge in a few of those areas today. So let's get started right away, because we have 5 substances to go through in a short amount of time. So we're going to start with alcohol. Now, unfortunately, alcohol kind of falls off some of our radar from time to time, and it's important to, regroup and really take a look at how much it really does impact us in the United States. So you can see that it contributes to 18.5% of emergency department visits, which, for one, to have alcohol contributing to that is very large. And all these statistics are from the National Institutes of Health. And again, that alcohol is the 3rd leading preventable cause of death in the United States, behind tobacco and poor diet and physical activity. So putting some of these things in perspective before we really, look at it by state and by teen use is important. And also to keep in mind that it also is a high contributor to driving fatalities. So when we take a look at, the alcohol use in teens, this data here is from the Youth YRBS survey. And in black, you see the percentage for the nation, and in red, you see Connecticut's percentages. So although we are, under, some of these national percentages, there's still a lot of work to be done to bring these rates down. And I want you to pay attention to, throughout this presentation, we'll start seeing some of this theme of females reporting higher usage than males, which is a bit of a shift from years ago. And these numbers, again, showing that both in 30-day use and binge drinking, that females are reporting a little bit higher than the males. So when we think of, we also want to think of the alcohol use in young adults, not just teens. And this data comes from the Connecticut Epidemiological Profile on Alcohol, which is put out by the State Epidemiological Outcomes Work Group. And you can see here, these are a bit shocking. I find that young adults, have the highest rate of reported past month alcohol use. And, more importantly, that the prevalence of binge drinking has remained consistently higher than the national average. And that young adults, are 47% the highest group. And then lastly, I found this statistic to be a bit troubling as well, that Connecticut ranking the highest state in the country for the percent of alcohol impaired driving fatalities compared to the total driving fatalities. And again, when you'll hear binge drinking used throughout this presentation, and when we say that, we mean 4 or more drinks in a row for females and 5 or more drinks in a row for males in a short amount of time. So, the health effects of alcohol and how the impact on your brain is really most important to pay attention to. Basically, we have a brain here and we have all the different sections of it, and you can clearly see how alcohol affects every section of your brain. Especially in young adolescent brains, we know that they are developing into their mid-20s, 25, 26 years old. So, using alcohol, before that age can do some serious damage and cause structural and function damage. Alcohol is a central nervous depressant, and over a long period of time, it can damage the frontal lobe, which, as we know, is important for decision making. So in addition to the health risks and the impacts on the brain, there's also some other serious risks of alcohol use in teens, such as some social problems, or we know that alcohol increases the risk of depression and suicide, thoughts of violence. We also know that teens who drink risk getting into trouble with the law, and also that 1/3 of all teen traffic deaths are related to alcohol. So, again, this list continues, and I won't go through all of these with you. We included all of these on the slide so that you can, look through them all later more in depth. But just a few to highlight, physical problems, unwanted, unplanned, unprotected sexual activity, memory problems, changes in brain development that may have lifelong effects. And, most important alcohol poisoning, the risk of alcohol poisoning. And it's important that, you're able to recognize the signs and know, when you see alcohol poisoning. And I thought this graphic was interesting from Duke University's alcohol pharmacology education program, where it's almost kind of like a Likert scale of, going from sober to intoxicated, and then, to full alcohol poisoning, resulting in ultimate death, and some of the signs that you're looking for. So again, cold skin, depressed breathing, vomiting, confusion, severe dehydration, liver damage, all of these signs of alcohol poisoning. And when I was going through this and we were looking, and we saw, I was talking with our team, and we were looking at passed out, and we were thinking how important it was to talk about the difference between, passing out and blacking out, and how sometimes they get used interchangeably, but, blacking out is quite different than just passing out. So I'd like to just share a few. And this all comes from the National Institute of Health as well. But a few things pertaining to a blackout. A person is still awake, but their brain is not creating any new memories. These are gaps in a person's memory for events that occur while they were intoxicated. And these gaps happen when a person drinks enough alcohol to temporarily block the transfer of memories from short-term to long-term storage, which is known as memory consolidation. And again, this all happens, like we saw on the last slide, on the areas of the brain, the hippocampus. Blackouts tend to begin at, and I found this one perhaps to be the most astonishing to me, that blackouts begin around a blood alcohol concentration of 0.16%. So it's about twice the legal limit. And, it's really not too much alcohol, to get to this point. And especially, like it says in the next column here, that if you're taking any kind of medications, that it can actually occur at lower blood alcohol content. So it really doesn't take much when there's a combination of things going on here. And also, we know that blackouts are more likely to occur when alcohol enters the bloodstream quickly. So this goes back to, we were talking about binge drinking and some of the dangers of binge drinking. So I thought it was important that we included that. So, what are some ways that we are, that we can prevent underage drinking? And this is just a short list. There's, we could talk about different prevention strategies for a long period of time, but just to name a few, education and awareness campaigns for youth, importantly created by youth on risks of binge drinking. It's a powerful message when it comes from your peers. So also, parental guidance and talking points, providing education or providing resources around this topic, limiting the number of retail alcohol outlets in a given area. This goes back to reducing access in your community, and also holding these alcohol retailers responsible if they're selling to underage, minors. Your community may implement compliance checks to, as a strategy. Consistently enforcing laws against underage drinking and alcohol impaired driving is paramount as well. Around the house, safe storage, but most importantly, being a positive role model we know is important. You know, and again, this gets to studies show that a relationship between underage drinking behaviors and drinking behaviors of adult relatives and in the same household, you know, that there's a relationship there. So, you know, safe storage in the home and being responsible is very important. And again, in addition to the resources that we already, you know, shared in the previous slides, just a few more that I wanted to mention. 21 for a Reason is a great one, and they don't only have talking points and you know, facts on drinking, but also for vaping, for cannabis, and for gambling. Ask, Listen, Learn, again, a lot of downloadable tools to, you know, promote a healthy lifestyle and to, like it says, say no to underage drinking. National NIDA for Teens is great. You know, they have a great social media, which is also good to follow. And again, the National Institute of Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism, which we mentioned earlier, and the CDC. But we'll provide all these to you again in a follow-up email after. So thank you. With that, I will turn it over to Wendy.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you. And we're going to dive a little bit now into cannabis, which is actually the most commonly used drug after alcohol in both Connecticut and in the US. So let's take a closer look at that. Next slide, Ken. Let's start here with the real basics. You know, what is cannabis? Cannabis really refers to those products that are derived from the cannabis sativa plant or the indica plant. So those are really refers to the plant-based materials. And the most commonly discussed, you know, element of that is the THC, or the tetrahydrocannabinol. And that is the element that gives the psychoactive results. So that's what we hear the most about, and that's what we're going to be talking about again more today. So I just want to make a distinction then between cannabis, hemp, and marijuana. They're very different, but yet they're all very related. They both can come from a similar species of plant. The primary difference between the two, between hemp and marijuana, is the THC content. In hemp, there is a maximum content of 0.3% THC, whereas marijuana can have significantly more. And as we'll be talking about that THC content a little bit later. The hemp plant was made legal in the 2018 Farm Bill. So that is legalized for cultivation. There's a process and there's an application that farmers must submit in order to farm hemp. And marijuana is still classified as a Schedule I drug federally. So federally, it is still illegal. You may, in many of our stores now, you may see CBD outlets in Connecticut, and you'll find hemp products for sale. And you know, the primary difference, as we say, is the THC. Some states I've actually heard in some of the reporting, people are calling today's hemp is yesterday's marijuana. So it's really kind of, if you can equate it in that way, it's much less THC as it was back in the Woodstock days. Extractions can come from either hemp or marijuana. There are over 500 known compounds within the cannabis plant itself, and these are just some of them. We're hearing a lot more about THC. And CBD and THC right now are some of the most searched topics on the internet. So people are really curious and trying to learn a little more about that. And both, as I say, are natural components of the cannabis plant. Many of these components are currently marketed for medical purposes. The most widely recognized one, as we say, is CBD. But many others are now emerging as in the market, and where they're gaining further recognition. CBD is not FDA approved. That's an important distinction for us to make. Findings do remain mixed as to the efficacy of all of the products. While some do show promise, there's much more research that is still needed, and this research is underway now. Just an additional note, CBD users have been found to test positive in drug screenings. So if an individual is consuming a CBD product and has a drug test for potential employment purposes, or they could very likely test positive because it does contain THC. Let's take a little look here on what cannabis extractions are, or the synthetic products. This is today's cannabis. This is how much of the cannabis today is processed. Synthetic cannabis or marijuana does not actually contain cannabis from the cannabis plant. It's typically a variety of plants that are sprayed with chemicals to mimic the THC found in organic cannabis plant. And the sale and possession of these products still do remain illegal. I just want to take a note of the conditions in which you see many of these products are being processed. And these extractions also lead to the high levels of contaminants found in the products. And here's just a demonstration of the many different types of products that are out there. People can smoke cannabis in hand-rolled cigarettes, joints, and pipes, water pipes, also known as bongs or blunts, cigar wraps. Extracts from the cannabis plant can also be made into resins that include hash oil, wax, or harder products like a brittle or a shatter. Cannabis can be vaped using vaporizers, dabs, or vape pens. And cannabis can be mixed into food, including brownies, cookies, candies, and a variety of types of edibles. And we're going to look a little bit later into some of the drinks and teas and alcohol products that are now featuring cannabis and THC. I want to touch a moment here about potency and purity. The terms are often used interchangeably. However, there is a distinct difference between the two. And it really goes down to the API, or the active pharmaceutical ingredient. When we're talking about potency, we're talking about the amount of API that is really needed to produce an effect. On the other hand, purity is the amount of API in that sample. So they're very different things, but so it's important that we know that distinction as spokespeople in the prevention world. Potency is varied. The amount of API that's needed, as I say, it's the amount that's needed to produce an effect. And then on the lower level are going to be the plant-based products. The higher level of potency is going to be more of those shatters and the concentrates that are available. There are no caps currently for the potency of commercial cannabis. Hemp, as I mentioned earlier, does have a cap of 0.3%. The concentration of THC in cannabis products can vary widely, and the average amount has increased over 220% over the past 20 years. And this has led to the higher addiction rates that we're seeing of late. This points directly to the potency that we're seeing in today's THC within cannabis, in CBD samples that have been taken off the market recently. In the early 1990s, the average THC content of cannabis was 3.8%. And it has rose to about 12.2% in 2014, and we're seeing around 15% today. So you can see the significant difference. And the average cannabis extract contains about 50% THC. So really dangerous, really strong. And some samples that have been found on the market actually exceed 80%. I've seen some marketing that's up there around 95%. So it's incredible. As the THC level increases, so does the level of addiction. And how is this affecting us? How does that affect the users? And these health effects here, I've listed them all. I'm not going to read it all. You'll have this as a resource. But just to point out a few, we have the slowed reaction time and your motor coordination, impaired memory, judgment, and your attention. The increase of depression and psychosis, that's up to 8 times in the increase for those who are using cannabis. For students and for our youth spokespeople there, it's important to note that studies have shown a lower GPA and a longer time for those students to graduate. And the effects on the brain. The effects on the brain, as we're saying, specifically for adolescents, these all point to the loss of control of emotions, a slower processing time, poorer memory. You know, and use during the brain development can cause long-term, even permanent damage. It was once thought that it was temporary, but there are some studies now that are showing some of these can result in long-term effects, particularly when it comes to memory and impulse control, and the learning may all be affected. I just want to make a comment here as well that the additional studies that have been done of the exposure to cannabis to the fetus while in utero. Those women who have used cannabis while pregnant are showing that the child then has additional cognitive issues as they grow into young adulthood. Particularly, I'm saying in the middle school years, when that child is asked upon to have higher level of functioning, those youth are having more challenges at that time. So it is something that more studies are being done on this, but this is an emerging field of study that many scientists are trying to get more information on. They're showing that the fetus is not as protected from the cannabis use as they may be from alcohol. But this is all emerging at this time. There are effects on emotions and relationships. I touched upon this a little bit earlier. There's a decreased emotion regulation. The influences upon the emotional processing. The THC actually increases the anxiety in fearful situations. There is a train of thought, if you will, that's there that users are thinking that they're using this to help relieve their anxiety, when in fact studies are showing that it increases anxiety for the user. And here, these are all known signs. These are from the DSM-5. There are actually 11 symptoms that are identified in the DSM-5. I'm not going to read through all of them. As Ken said earlier, you'll have this as a resource. And actually, I put them on there are 2 screens of them. And it's been identified that those who have 2 to 3 of these symptoms are known to be mild. To have a mild cannabis use disorder. Those identified with 4 to 5 symptoms are identified as a moderate cannabis disorder, and then 6 or more symptoms would be a severe cannabis disorder. And there are approximately 4.8 million people who have been identified with a cannabis use disorder in 2019. So this is becoming as I said, with the higher potencies, we're seeing more individuals identified with the cannabis use disorder. Approximately 1 in 10 who use cannabis will become addicted. And when it comes to youth 18 and under, that the rate rises to 1 in 6. And I've actually seen some studies that are suggesting 1 in 4. So that goes back to the brain and the early use of onset while the brain is developing will increase the concerns for addiction. There's also some emerging science showing the differences in how men and women process cannabis and how our bodies react differently. In the similarity side, at least 1 or more other health disorder or a low rate of seeking treatment. That's across the board. has been found with cannabis use disorder, but you can see some of the differences here. Women have increased panic attacks and anxiety disorders, and disorder develops more quickly than in men. And men tend to be more physical, and the antisocial personality disorders will be on the male side. When I mentioned disorder develops more quickly, in the next slide, we're going to talk, oh, it's coming up a little later. I think I've got one in between. Go ahead, Ken. Withdrawal. The withdrawal symptoms then from the cannabis use disorder, it will peak after 4 days. It'll last up to 16 days. So it's an extensive withdrawal process for both men and women. And it can be more severe in women, which is concerning because it also then leads to the fact that women have more of a challenge in the recovery process, and it can lead to the cravings and relapse. There's also this effect that they're calling the telescoping effect. And this has to do with the fact that women typically start off at lower rates, but escalate much more quickly than men. So it can start small, and it's something that women, partially due to body composition and the reasons that women are have been known to be attracted to using, is that women use it more for psychological reasons rather than physical reasons. Typically, women are not looking for the thrill of it; they're doing it for a release, and therefore it's a harder addiction to overcome for women. Looking at some of the developmental factors associated with cannabis use, this is really a truncated list. The full list you'll find in your resources from SAMHSA, but these are some of those that are most frequently discussed, and they're really very relevant to our prevention work. The availability of cannabis and the family history of cannabis use, the favorable parental attitudes. As we know, parents are still the most important influencer in a use decision to use. Protective factors, again, goes back to your family communications, individual characteristics, high intelligence, or resilient temperament, in your reinforcement for pro-social involvement on the social side, all really important as protective factors. And then, as we know, cannabis, the adult use of cannabis is now legal in the state of Connecticut. And since 2012, 19 states and the Washington, D.C. have legalized marijuana for adults over the age of 21. 38 states and DC have legalized medical marijuana. So what does that really mean for most Americans? It means that most Americans, in one way or another, do have access to cannabis. And despite its prevalence and the increasing legalization, marijuana remains classified by the USDA as a Schedule I drug, as I mentioned before, and it is still illegal on the federal level in all of the country. We take a look here at use and youth usage. And you can see here on this that Connecticut does lead not only the New England region, but it leads across the country in all categories between 12 and 17, over 12, in the 18 years or more, we lead in use, past 30-day past use. And this was in the most recent study in 2019. Now, what does the retail market look like? And we're seeing some trends and some changes in the marketplace. And cannabis today is trending away from the plant matter and the plant-based or flower-based products, and moving more toward the concentrates. And it's you can see here at the bottom, it's nearly replacing that was once the plant product, is now replaced by the concentrates. And who is this market? Who is buying the cannabis today? You can see that back in 2018, there was a wide divide between genders and usage. that divide has shrunk immensely. And of those purchasing, it is almost evenly divided between genders now, between men and women. So we're coming together. Women are using the products far more. However, as I mentioned before, women tend to purchase with quote unquote health reasons in mind. And they favor topicals and tinctures. This is just a snapshot of the projections of what they are anticipating the market for cannabis to be in the coming years. This is from 2018, and they're anticipating it to double by 2030. And who's buying this? In addition to being women, now this is by generation, and you can see that it's the millennials, Gen X, Gen Z, that are the largest consumers of the cannabis products. This really, you can point as well to the decrease in the perception of harm. It really correlates almost, exactly with what we're seeing in this chart as well. We've seen between a 15 and 30% decrease in the perception of harm, depending upon the age grades we're talking about. But it's been significant. And that's been just in the last 5 years. We've seen that decrease in the perception of harm. And along with that has been the increase in use. Marketing has been very targeted. Again, you can see to women and to youth. In much of the cannabis marketing used today, it remains reflections of the very same techniques that were used by the tobacco industry back in the 70s. You can see the Virginia Slims ad in the bottom right-hand corner, very closely mirroring what you see today for the cannabis marketing. You have the celebrity endorsements of all ages, also very similar to what we once saw in the tobacco industry. And the newest trend on the horizon here are the beverages. The Cannabis Industry Journal estimates a $1 billion industry in just a few years in these beverages. A Canadian investment firm estimates that THC infused beverages will be a $340 million market by the end of this year. But if we put that in perspective, alcohol counterparts are in 346 million. I'm sorry. So it's only about a $6 million difference. So we're talking about something reaching that's on close levels to where we are currently with alcohol beverages. And we have beverage leaders, Coors, Pepsi, Constellation Brands, which is our #1 importer of beer, Boston Beer, Molson, are all in the developmental stages of developing THC infused beverages right now. There are some parts of our country, I believe New York and New Jersey, are already devising plans to launch adult use markets and lounges that will spotlight these products. So there's already a whole lot of advertising that's already being planned for these products as the products emerge. So something for us in the prevention world to be keeping our eyes on. Another way that THC and cannabis are being normalized for all people, and particularly our youth. And we look again at the marketing, and we would be remiss if I didn't talk about the social marketing and social media marketing. And this is an article, and there's a link here for you to go to the article. And this was done using 2,600 posts on Facebook and Instagram from 14 businesses in Alaska, Colorado, Oregon, and Washington, all states where cannabis is legal. And despite the fact that there were prohibitions, discounts and promotions were found in approximately 35% of all the posts. So it again points to the fact of enforcement and the fact that we need to be, as prevention professionals, be monitoring some of these outlets to be sure that our youth are safe and that the guidelines are being followed. Here we have a graph or a chart. Again, this is in your resources. And this comes from the DEA, and it's not only talking about marijuana, but really it's all drugs and the emojis that are being used in our texting that really convey alcohol, drug, marijuana, the various products that are there, and how they're being accessed, through texting and through the internet. So this is a great article for parents, for us as prevention professionals to take a look at. I highly encourage you to go out and take a closer look. And then we look at cannabis resources. In addition to all the resources you found at the bottom of each one of those pages, these are some great resources for you to take a look at. The talking with your teen about marijuana and preventing marijuana use among youth from SAMHSA are great resources, particularly as prevention professionals. There's some great ideas of campaigns that we can take a look at and really model our own needs and desires, for our communities based upon some proven results. For teens, we have some other specific resources for you there. And with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Lisa.
Thank you. I've been keeping an eye on the chat box and I haven't noticed any questions. Does anybody want to pose any questions either on alcohol or cannabis so far? Does anybody have any questions or any comments or something new they've learned? You're among friends. Okay, if you have something, post it in the chat box and we'll follow up with it in the greater discussion. So I think at this point, we're going to send it back to Ken, right, Ken?
Yep. Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, I know it's a lot of information to absorb at once. So definitely if something comes to you a little bit later, feel free to put it in the chat box. We're happy to, or send us an email. We're happy to answer, any questions you might have. So let me just pull up my screen again here. Okay. Coming in clear again there. Everybody see that okay? Okay. All right, so vaping. Now, figured we'd start with, the law with vaping, because we know in, recent years that the law has changed. So 21 makes it easy, 21 for gambling, 21 for alcohol, 21 for tobacco, e-cigarettes, 21 for handguns. It's very easy law and policy and number to remember. But I also, thought to include here the fines that some sellers are subject to, if they are found selling to minors. And we saw, some similar types of these devices on Wendy's slides earlier. But again, to just go through kind of an evolution here of vaping devices and where they've evolved to. We have the bigger mod kind of devices right here with the rechargeable batteries. And then you notice they've gotten smaller and more discreet to look like flash drives, or in fact, looking like pens, and just getting smaller and smaller. And you have here, I'm sure everybody is familiar too, but with the pods that you can, that are nicotine filled, or can be THC filled now, but then plug into these devices so that they can be vaped. You can imagine how easy these devices are to conceal which again makes it, hard to detect in school sometimes, especially for teachers. So what's actually in these e-cigarettes? I like this poster here. I thought this came through the FDA, but I'm not positive. But it's great. It gives you all some of the basic components that you'll find in many of these vapes, and you see that a lot of them contain items and chemicals that you'd find in like paint thinner. You have formaldehyde, acetone, which we know is a harmful chemical. And again, a lot of times these get marketed as just being vapor, when in fact we know it's not vapor, but it's actually a form of aerosol. So the myth of it being harmless is not true. And the majority of vapes do contain nicotine that are sold. They don't just contain water vapor. So some of the health effects, just to name, a few, we know that these e-liquids, are toxic, and we know that they are also much more potent than just smoking a cigarette. In fact, some of these pods, contain as much nicotine as an entire pack of cigarettes, and sometimes even more. So it's very concentrated. And because it is so strong, it really does increase the susceptibility to addiction, especially with the underage brain still developing. Again, we don't know all the long-term effects of these because they are so new too. So a lot of research is still emerging on this, which makes it even a little bit scarier, perhaps, and even more of a risk to take when you're not even sure of, of the research that's out there. And again, this last bullet point here, teens who vape are 3.5 times more likely to smoke cigarettes, and almost 3 times more likely to use cannabis as well. So when we look at results from the 2019 Connecticut Youth Risk Behavior Survey, we find that 1 in 4 of the high school students are using some form of tobacco in the last 30 days, which includes cigarettes, cigars, and other electronic devices. The majority of those individuals were using vaping devices. And we know that female high school students were using at a higher rate than the male counterparts. High school students who reported poor mental health during the past 30 days were about twice as likely as their peers without mental health difficulties to have used tobacco. So when we look at risk factors, I like looking at this model of a socio-ecological levels here, kind of thinking of it as a bullseye with many different layers. And, each level going from individual level to relationship level, community and societal level, you're going to have different risks associated with it. And there's also going to be different protective factors that are going to be used in each of these layers. And just to give, just talking briefly about each of these layers, individual, you might find that there's a family history that might increase the likelihood of, of vaping or developing addiction over time. Go down to community level, this is more about school. We're talking, what are some what are some of the reducing social isolation in school and things like that. And then we have societal finally. And let's just look at some of those, looking at these layers. Let's look at some of the different risk factors, again, in greater detail. So again, individual level, it's perceiving it as being, safer alternative to cigarettes, right? That's one thing that we hear a lot, and that perception we know is a risk factor. We won't go through all these, but relationship level, again, we're talking perception of peer approval and looking to your parents and looking to their approval on it. As a parent, Are you, you know, having conversations with your teen? Are you talking to them, you know, about these effects and showing your disapproval? Community level, we're talking access to retail stores, and this might, you know, this might mean that you implement a strategy that involves compliance checks to make sure that, you know, retail shops in your community are not selling to minors. So some protective factors, again, by levels. You know, high commitment to school at an individual level, seeing, you know, vaping as harmful and understanding the risks and the health risks. Relationship level, you know, having your peers sharing your attitude, your unfavorable attitude. Pro-social opportunities with your family, other positive reinforcement things. So society and cultural level, we're looking again at laws and regulations that limit the access and usage of these substances. So I know we've talked, you know, about evidence-based prevention strategies. We mentioned it earlier in the presentation. So just so everyone is on the same page with the definition, you know, these have been evaluated and have demonstrated to be effective in preventing these health problems or behaviors upon the best available research. They're aimed to decrease the effect and prevalence of these risk factors, and they look to strengthen protective factors. So again, what do these look like? These evidence-based prevention strategies, you know, will be used to address and leverage, you know, the following, you know, bullet points that you see here: knowledge, attitudes, you know, all kinds of behavior and perception of harm. You know, that's what we're talking about here. Stigma, peer influences. I won't read through all of these, but and again, you know, what are some examples of some things that are out there? And, you know, I will provide links, you know, in the follow-up email to some of these, but if you haven't had a chance to check out this Smoke Screen online game, it's a pretty neat game. It's more for the middle school, I would say, age range, but again, it's reinforcing some, you know, healthy lifestyle, some healthy choices, and gaining some knowledge about, you know, the harmful effects of tobacco and e-cigarettes. From a school level, you know, vaping-free campuses, some policy, so we're looking at, and then again, I'll provide some links to some of these other things here. The tobacco prevention toolkit is phenomenal by Stanford School of Medicine, and this includes, you know, an entire curriculum and a wealth of resources around tobacco prevention. Catch My Breath, developed by University of Texas, another, you know, another good one that shows activities and provides curriculum. And then Project Alert. And then a few more, you know, there are a lot of vaping prevention resources out there, but just a few more to put in here, and all these will link, they're hyperlinked to go right to these. So visit our Cruise into Communication messages, T-Task, you know, on our website. We have what you should know about vaping. We have a video. We also have a training. And again, the in-depth with that, which I showed on last slide. And then Not on Tobacco by the American Lung Association is another good one. And actually, there's one more that I wanted to include that you sent to me recently, Lisa, as well. I forget, I'm drawing a blank where it was from right now. But we'll be sure to include that on this slide too. I'll update it. So any questions about vaping before I turn it over to Lisa to talk a little bit about prescription stimulants? Okay. I think we're good. I'm going to pass it over to you, Lisa.
Okay, I'm going to be covering the last two substances, prevention stimulants and then prevention opioids. I've noted in the box, if people have been posing questions, we've been trying to address those to the best of our ability. So check that out. Also, I've just put in, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 names that appear on our participant list for whom we don't have an email. So we can't send you the slides or the link to the recording unless we get your email. So you can do one or two things. You can post it in the box or post it privately to me in the box if you prefer not to share, or you can go to our registration page, which I've listed right at the top of the chat box, and you can click on that. So whatever you'd like to do, just if you want to get the mailing. So thank you, Alana. I appreciate it. And anyone else, everyone else, if your name isn't in the box, I've checked you on our list. You should be okay. So thank you everyone for your patience. I know this is a little different than what we usually do. We usually have time for questions and discussions, and we may do an activity or two, but there's a lot of information here, and we wanted to make sure you had current information. So we appreciate your patience. So I have Connecticut, I have prescription stimulants, and I have a person in my house who uses them. So I have a little bit of lab experience as well. And we had a little family joke. First day did not take them because prescription was running low and said to me, we don't do too much on the first day. So I figured it was okay. I said, okay, how'd it go? She goes, I definitely need to take them the next day because it was really hard focusing. So really sees a difference when they use and when they don't. And I thought that was interesting. So I wanted to share that with you. And one said, oh, I've got a presentation. I better make sure I have my my medicine. So I thought that was cute. So I'm going to see if for some reason I'm having a hard time seeing these. Oh, thank you. The thingy to advance the slide, the cursor. Thank you. So prescription stimulants are medicines used to treat primarily 2 medical conditions. One is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD. We used to refer to that as attention deficit disorder, ADD, or hyperactivity disorder, and they've put those together. So it's one disorder now. And narcolepsy, which is when people cannot help but fall asleep, and they don't have control over it. It's a sleep disorder, legitimate. That's another reason they prescribe these. They used to prescribe these for things like diet pills, medication. And what they found is these are easily abused. And so they put some more thinking and took back, or what's the right word, deleted some of the conditions because they found that people could misuse these. So why do we have them? The idea is they increase alertness, attention, concentration, and energy. Research is also being conducted with both prescription stimulants and some other stimulants that could become prescriptions for treatment-resistant depression. That's people who have tried traditional medications for depression and it doesn't work for them, and post-traumatic stress disorder. So research is being done now on those 2 conditions. Okay, so common prescription stimulants. Some of you have probably already familiar with some of these names. Ritalin and Concerta, or I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. And that is methylphenidate. I'm not sure if I'm saying these right. I'm not a pharmacist. Adderall is one people are familiar with. Vyvanse. Again, I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. And Dexedrine. So those, or Dexedrine, those are all some common prescription stimulants. And some of the slang terms are speed uppers, vitamin R. And one of the things, you know, when you're researching these terms or these medications, you know, it's always good to check the source of where you're getting your information. So if you're researching these, you know, Googling these, I always tell my kids, okay, what's the source? Where did you get that from? So, you know, making sure it's a medically vetted source when we're checking for information. Okay, next one. Doctor's prescription is required for these, like any other prescription that we get. whether it's cholesterol or blood pressure or whatever. Doctors consider our height, our weight, other health conditions we have, and other medications we are taking when prescribing. And they always weigh the risks and the benefits with people to say, is this, yeah, there may be some risks with medication, but do the benefits outweigh? And regular doctor's appointments are required for monitoring health. Blood pressure and heart is one of the things that's important to monitor, because these drugs are stimulants which increase the heart rate, the blood pressure, so that's important. Categorized as a controlled substance by the federal government, which means it's a substance for which there's a high potential for abuse. Easy to get addicted to these or develop a tolerance, withdrawal symptoms, and a substance misuse disorder. You cannot renew at the pharmacy without a new doctor's order. So for example, I cannot call up the pharmacy and get a refill for my child without the doctor authorizing that specific prescription each time. So it's not like they give a standing order for like 6 prescriptions and you can just easily do that between you and the pharmacist. Next slide. Prescription stimulants increase the activity of brain chemicals, including dopamine, which is involved in reinforcement of reward and pleasure, and norepinephrine. Help me out here, folks.
Epinephrine.
Thank you. It affects your blood pressure, your heart rate, and your blood sugar and your breathing. People who use these in a non-medically approved way report a feeling of rush or euphoria, along with increased blood pressure and heart rate, increased breathing because of decreased blood flow, increased blood sugar, opened up breathing passages, and decreased appetite. So you can see where the decreased appetite, it was used for diet, but it's not used for that anymore, for people trying to lose weight. But you can also understand where if you're misusing them, the increased blood pressure, heart rate, decreased blood flow, increased blood sugar are all medical conditions that we would be concerned about somebody having and need monitoring. Okay, thank you. High doses can lead to a dangerously high body temperature, irregular heartbeat, heart failure, and seizures. And repeated misuse, even within a short time and high doses, can lead to psychosis. And that's a psychiatric or mental health condition where basically a person is losing touch with reality. They may see things that aren't there, hallucinations, delusions, hear voices, believe things that aren't true, anger, paranoia, addiction, and sharing of drug injection. If you're injecting these, increases the risk of infectious diseases like HIV and hepatitis. Thank you. Big question. We know these are considered by many young people, young adults, as study drugs or performance drugs. So the question, do these drugs enhance your academic performance? Do they make you smarter? And part of that has come out because of the greater availability due to an increase in prescriptions. It's easy to divert and obtain these drugs. People sell them to peers. They may share them. They may get them from somebody's house and may assume it's safe because doctors prescribe them and they're legal medications. But there is absolutely no evidence, and they've done research, that the students who are not diagnosed with ADHD get better grades. It may help some alertness, but it doesn't help you do better academically. Thank you. One of the things we wanted to bring up that's really important is the whole idea of counterfeit drugs. And if you've been watching the news has been talking about this. The DEA has issued press releases and they've been interviewed on the news. And the idea is that illegal drug producers, manufacturers, people who are selling them are selling counterfeit drugs that look very similar to prescription stimulants, opioids, and other medicines. So you may think you're purchasing a particular drug, but you are purchasing something else. And it may have some of the chemical in it, or it may not. It may be mixed with something that contaminates it, or another substance. And one of the substances we're most concerned of, because it's so easy and cheap, is fentanyl. And as most of you probably know, fentanyl is a synthetic opioid, prescription painkiller that is 50 to 100 times stronger than morphine. And it can stop breathing. It is found in a huge percentage of the fatal drug overdoses that we hear. And naloxone, also under the brand name Narcan, is used to help revive a person who has had an overdose due to prescription opioids, illegal opioids, fentanyl. And sometimes people need multiple doses of naloxone, but it's not always successful. Even with 3 or 4 doses, some people don't recover or come out of the overdose. So one of the things we put here on the bottom of the page is DEA, One Pill Can Kill. And this is a campaign that they are using to really educate young people, parents, and others about counterfeit drugs and how dangerous they are, and how many of these counterfeit drugs use fentanyl, which can be deadly. So it can be now, the first time you use a pill, could cause an overdose. So one of the messages that we really think is important to share with people is, you don't know what this pill is made of unless you're getting it from a pharmacy and it's been prescribed for your condition by your doctor. Okay, thank you. And these are some articles that we just wanted to share with you. It's happening, as we speak. And we will try to find the quote. I forgot to put it in. How many millions of pills have been seized by the DEA? And it's more from like January to June of this year than it was of last year. The previous year. They're already surpassed that in just like the first 6 or 7 months. So we will find that article and put it in the follow-up email to you. But here's some other examples. And then on the of what we're finding, what the DEA is finding, and other law enforcement. And then you can see at the bottom how similar the DEA a fake prescription is, how different or how similar the regular medication is from a counterfeit pill. I knew I'd get it there. Okay. So next page, thank you. And we'll have some other examples to show you too.
And that's on me, Lisa. I meant to put an arrow indicating fake and real.
That's okay. We have another picture that does a really nice job. That's all.
It's usually the ones that, look like they're more real that end up being the fake ones.
Mm-hmm. Okay, potential for misuse and abuse. Like other stimulants, such as methamphetamine or cocaine, you can develop tolerance for these, requiring more and more to get the same effects. You go through withdrawal and you become addicted to them. And you can overdose on prescription drugs, just like illicit drugs or illegal drugs as well. And some of the withdrawal symptoms people may feel is fatigue, because remember, they're increasing your alertness and your energy. So you don't have that artificial alertness and energy. Depression and sleep problems. Sleep problems is a big reason some people continue to use to avoid that. And they can lead to substance use disorder and addiction. And one of the things that the mental health community and behavioral health is, they use the term addiction, but they've also talked about substance use disorder with mild and moderate and severe. Severe would be similar to addiction. And you're looking at what are some of the symptoms, and some of the symptoms are when repeated use of any substance causes health problems and failure to meet your responsibilities at school, work, or home, and a compulsion to use it over and over again, and not being able to stop once you start. Those are some of the things. The recommendation is before you stop using on your own, you should consult with a health care provider. And if you have any questions about treatment and referrals to treatment, consult with a healthcare provider. There are no FDA approved medications for treating misuse or abuse of amphetamines as there are for like opioid addiction. And the treatment that is used is based on people who have developed an addiction to cocaine or methamphetamine. And that's including a medically supervised detox to make sure you're okay, and behavioral therapy. Those are the two that are generally used. And so I searched high and low for data on prescription stimulant use, and it was hard to find. The Monitoring the Future survey, which NIDA, National Institute of Drug Abuse, uses, this is the one that's been going on since like the later mid 70s, from the University of Michigan. They have some research on kids who use Adderall and Ritalin. But the question is, are you using it for, medically supervised? So that's not helping us. But most aren't asking. If they are, I haven't been able to find it. I will keep looking for it. But here are some resources on NIDA, National Institute of Drug Abuse. They've got some great pages. If you go to this page in particularly, that talk, and really it's not scientific terms. It's basically where I got a lot of this content from. So it's information that you could create or share with parents or coalition members. The Mind Matters is a prevention curriculum designed for 5th to 8th graders. And there's a teacher's guide, a student's handbook. And I don't see you necessarily using this with your high school students, but if your high school students were interested in teaching younger students, this is something they could use. Connecticut Clearinghouse has tons of information. And then of course there's the DEA One Pill Can Kill campaign, just to reinforce the danger of these counterfeit pills and the idea that they could have fentanyl in them. Are there any questions? Oh, and so one of the things we're talking about is, as you're processing this information, what are some messages that need to be shared with young people, with the adults in their lives who help to influence them and mentor them. So as you listen to the material or as you review the material and the worksheet that I sent you earlier, the idea is there's tons of information, and sometimes we have sound bites. We need to develop sound bites as prevention messengers. So think about what are some of the sound bites or some of the messages that you think are real priority for your community and the young people you work with. So that's that. Deep breath. Any questions about stimulants before we go further with opioids? Okay, put them in the chat box if you have. And if we don't know, we will research and get back to you. So prescription opioids, we know we've been hearing a lot about this. And the Connecticut Youth Risk Behavior Survey through the Department of Public Health here in Connecticut issues this survey every 2 years among high school students. So this is only high school student data. And they're part of the Center for Disease Control National Youth Risk Behavior Survey. So what's nice about this is we can put the Connecticut data into context. Now, what we did is we looked at the question here: have you ever taken a prescription pain med without a doctor's prescription or differently than the doctor told you to? And the reason I chose that was because I couldn't find 30-day use data for Connecticut. It's probably in the report, but I couldn't find it on the website. So we'll keep looking. So what we're looking at is Connecticut data first. And the total from 2019 was 10% of Connecticut youth had used a prescription pain medicine without a doctor's prescription or differently than the doctor told them. And 9.1% for male and 11.3% of females responded that they did. So that's whoever took it at least once. And the reason I put that up, our gold standard is 30-day use, for most recent use, but I put this up there again because of that One Pill Can Kill and what we're learning about counterfeit pills and the pills that have fentanyl. So the idea here is 10% of those kids put themselves at substantial risk when they try. So that's why I did it. And then you can look at the additional statistics, which we won't break down here. You know, it looks at the difference in age, and it looks at the difference in gender, male and female in this survey. And then it looks at the difference in adults. And I thought it was interesting that, you know, it decreased from 15 old and 9th, 10th graders used at a higher rate than the 11th or 16th and 17th graders. And then it went back up again. And women or females were using pretty much at a higher rate than the boys, just like the alcohol. And then we look at race, ethnic group, and where you see the 2 dotted lines, that means they did not have enough data to have a valid answer on those students. Okay. Prescription opioids, the percentage of students who obtain prescription pain medicine without a doctor's prescription or differently than how they used it, by someone giving it to them or getting it for somebody else's home. So a friend, a family member shared it, or they got it at somebody else's home, 30.6%. And of that number, 26.9% of males, 33% of females. So not quite a third of all students, a third of females report that's how they got the medicine, the prescription pain med. Now, Connecticut high school students versus national high school students. When we look at this statistic at 2019, what we find is the Connecticut students are actually lower than the national sample, the national survey. So when we're looking at high school students in Connecticut, it was 10.1% that ever used, compared with 14.3%. And the same with males, it was less. Females, Connecticut was less. Black students was a little bit higher. White students and Hispanic students were less. And I could not find data that breaks it down among heterosexual, LGBT students or students who aren't sure. But when you look at the national data, you know, 10% of all data or 14.3% of all data, it's 12.7% of heterosexual youth, and then it jumps to 23.9% of kids who identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, and those who aren't sure, it's 19.1. So once again, we see our LGBTQ youth at a higher risk for using these substances. And then I put in the national 30-day rate, just so you could have that comparison to what 30-day rate looks like compared to the national rate. Okay. And one of the things, oh, shoot. I think it's really interesting. I don't know how to explain this, whether it's the way the question has been asked, or whether it's because many local surveys are not looking at just high school students, but they're looking at 7th to 12th graders, those of you who do the local surveys, because the numbers that are routinely quoted for kids who are misusing prescription pain medicine is like 2 to 4%. So perhaps that 2 to 4% is so much lower because we've thrown 7th and 8th graders in there compared to the Connecticut youth risk, which is showing, you know, 10%, because that's only 9 to 12. So maybe that's the reason, because when I first looked at the data, I said, wow, that's really different from the surveys. But then it hit me, maybe it's the way the question is phrased, or maybe because we're putting the 7th and 8th graders in that lowers the percentage. Okay. Enough of a distraction there. Why do we include prescription opioids? Why are we talking about those? Because we talk about them so much. Use of prescription opioids or pain medications, as everybody know, has increased dramatically. The number of prescriptions that were given out. We're starting to see some change in that. But when the hospital association said we needed to look at pain as another vital sign and check on that, and then at the same time the pharmaceutical industry, you know, geared up the production and sales and marketing of these, we saw this huge number of prescription opioid prescriptions. They're often diverted to non-medical use. There's an increase in overdose and death because of them, and a risk factor for heroin use. it is using opioids can be a risk factor if you've become you're starting to develop tolerance or withdrawal. And what we've seen as a result of this is a change in the prescriptions, both in terms of the amount of prescription, who receives them, how much they receive them. We're really doing things at the local and state level to prevent diversion of them to non-medical use. We're learning to intervene with overdose, providing naloxone or Narcan, making sure first responders have it, and expanding treatment. The whole idea of medication-assisted treatment, that a doctor can prescribe medications to help a person who is trying to withdraw from or stop using, along with behavioral treatment. Okay. And I'm watching the clock, folks. Don't worry. What are prescription opioids? Class of drugs made from the opium poppy family, and they can either be made from the plant directly or in a lab by a scientist using chemicals mimicking the same chemical structure of them. Prescription opioids are medicines used to treat pain, and high pain, not average pain. Often post-surgical pain after you've been in surgery, if you're in chronic pain, or at the end of illnesses like cancer when the pain is severe. That's often. And again, doctors are thinking about what's the right word? Risks and benefits. And many doctors are changing their prescribing practices because of this crisis. And I can't remember if I talk about that next on the next slide. Do I? Okay. Doctor's prescription required. Again, this is categorized as a controlled substance, high potential for abuse and addiction. You cannot renew your prescription at the pharmacy without a new doctor's order. Like any prescription, you need to, the doctor considers your height, your weight, your other health conditions, other medications. And one thing I forgot to put in there, people are encouraged to say if they have an opioid tolerance or had difficulty with it, to tell their doctor so they can be mindful of that when prescribing. They may be looking at other alternatives because it can set a person up for relapse if they have a substance use disorder. Connecticut law has changed the prescribing. So your initial prescription is only 7 days for an adult, and then you have to meet with your doctor or talk with them, and then they determine whether they're going to give you another prescription. And the initial opioid prescription for youth is 5 days. Same thing. An adult prescription can be renewed by the doctor without the 7-day limit. And if they're going to give you more than 12 weeks, they have to talk about a treatment and care plan. What are some alternatives? What do you need to know about addiction? And one of the things a lot of doctors are doing is they are recommending alternatives first. Like, do you alternate Tylenol and Advil? Do you look at physical therapy? You know, what are some of the things that you should be doing first because of the opioid prescription and addiction and overdose crisis. Thank you. Here's some common prescription opioids. In the interest of time, I'm not going to read these, but you're all familiar with these. These are medicines. Fentanyl is in there, and we said how much more potent fentanyl is, 50 to 100 times more. They increase the activity of brain chemicals. They bind to and activate opioid receptors in the brain. They block pain signals because of this, and they release large amounts of dopamine, which are responsible for feelings of pleasure. And it's that dopamine release that reinforces youth and can lead to tolerance and addiction. Here are some of the side effects. Drowsiness, don't drive, confusion, nausea, constipation, euphoria, slow breathing. And it's the slowed breathing, which is a real concern because it can cause hypoxia, which is too little oxygen to the brain, and too little oxygen to the brain after a certain amount of time, a short period of time, like 4 minutes, can cause brain cells to die. And that can result in coma, permanent brain damage, or death. So this is why these are so important for people to know about. Other risks, misuse, because tolerance can develop very quickly with these. So they say, not only am I giving you a 7-day supply, but I expect these to last 7 days. Don't take them more than prescribed because of that. The risk of misusing these can bring on tolerance and withdrawal, and people can substitute when it gets harder to get them because they've been cut off or they're expensive. If they're trying to get them illegally, they may switch to heroin, which is cheaper and more available. And it says 4 to 6% who misuse prescription opioids switch to heroin, where 80% of people who first use heroin first started with prescription opioids. And more recent data is showing 1/3 report heroin is the first that they've used.
I'm in a training which is supposed to end in 5.
And again, sharing drug injection risks HIV and hepatitis, and older adults especially, we're concerned about them because of multiple prescriptions. And again, we've talked about how it can cause overdose. We've talked about the top already. Call 911. And they will bring Narcan. If it's not already on the premises, you cannot hurt a person giving them Narcan. So if you're not sure if it's an opioid misdose and you administer Narcan, you cannot hurt them. But opioid may help, definitely do that. And you may need multiple doses, not always successful. And don't mix opioids with alcohol or any other depressants because they both slow down central nervous system. And we're almost at the end gate here. Counterfeit drugs looking very similar to prescription drugs. So the ones on the top are the legitimate medications and the ones on the bottom are the counterfeit. And we gave you some 2 sources along with DEA. One Pill Can Kill, You Think You Know is a Connecticut campaign. And we give you the link in both of these. And then more news articles that you can search for. And just recently on the news, they had the rainbow colored fentanyl pills. So that's something new. And just some key messages for opioid prevention. You know, the risk of counterfeit drugs, especially fentanyl. You know, one pill can kill. The importance of safe prescribing and monitoring these drugs. Safe storage to prevent youth or others from accessing them. Safe disposal. And these are messages that you're probably already familiar with. And if you need more information, you can go to Change the Script, the campaign, which is right here. That the state sponsors. Check out these links. One of the things we wanted to give a shout out to was a guide that Jennifer Jacobson, one of our colleagues at T-Task, took the lead on putting together this Parent's Guide to Opioid Prevention. It's an ebook, digital book on our website. You can download the entire booklet or chapters. There's video and screens. Videos and PSAs, as well as You Think You Know, and all these other resources. And how are we? Okay, that's the last slide. Thank you. 5 o'clock. We would appreciate it if you could fill out an evaluation if you're still here. And we thank you for your time. We will stay on for a little bit if anybody has questions or comments. I know it's late in the day. Thank you.
I just put, let me just put the link in the chat box for everybody here. All right, we'd really appreciate if you just took a few minutes to take that Survey Monkey.
It's not long.
Nope.
And really quickly, I just put a link in the chat to a news article that I just uncovered during this presentation about the fentanyl that was seized in Connecticut. That is the rainbow fentanyl, but I did not realize that they packaged it in Skittles and
Yes.
Nerds.
Yep.
So as Halloween is approaching, make sure everybody is aware and checking out what they've really got in their candy bag.
Yep.
Really scary.
It is. It is. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. It was very good.
Thank you. And like I said, we'll stay on here in case anybody have any questions. Make sure we have your email if you were in that chat box. You know, scroll up if you'd like, so we can send you the materials. And thank you, Wendy. Thank you, Ken.
Thank you, everyone. It's good to see everyone here. Good to work with you both.
Thanks,
It
everyone.
was a pleasure. Looking forward to our next one.
Yes.
And we can probably stop recording if we haven't already. Great. I always